What a game that was at La Cerámica. What a win for Barcelona. Impressive performance by Hansi Flick's men. It wasn't easy at all. We knew it wouldn't be easy for the Blaugranas as they were facing one of the best teams in La Liga this season. In fact, if Villarreal had won today and the two games they have in hand, they would be La Liga leaders. But they lost at home, and they lost because of two clear mistakes made by their players. First, Santi Comesaña. That's a clear penalty on Rafinha. Well spotted by the referee. And then a terrible mistake made by Renato Vega. What was that tackle on Lamine Yamal? There was no need for that from behind with his both legs doing the scissors cut, as we say in Spain. And that's a clear red. I know that sometimes we've seen these kind of tackles in La Liga EA Sports and other competitions, and it all ends up with a yellow. But if the referee understands that that is not necessary, that it's violent, and that it's risky for the player, and it was risky for Lamine, well, that's a clear red. So those two mistakes put the game to bed for Villarreal. Not quite, though, because in the second half, they still had chances. They had a lot of chances, Villarreal, today against La Liga leaders. What to say about Joan García? To be honest, we've been thinking about who's the most important player for Barcelona this season. Pedri, Lamine, Rafinha. Joan García is there. Hello, Daniel. Hello, Kerwin. Hello, Tara. Hello, Stone Yamada. Thanks for joining. Daniel Mirza says, if Villarreal still finish top 4, do they still play in the Champions League? Yes. They will qualify for the Champions League next season in the end top 4. In fact, Spain still has a possibility, just like last season, to put 5 teams in the Champions League. It will all depend on how the Spanish teams perform this season in Europe, not only in the Champions League, but the Europa League and the Conference League too. So let's discuss the game that just ended at La Cerámica, because I think that this was one of those games that everybody inside the club at Barcelona had painted on red. This was the alarm. This was a very important game. There was a clear message. If we win this will prove our point that we are the favourites to win La Liga again. And they went to Villarreal and they won without Pedri. And I remember earlier this season sort of saying, no Pedri, no party for Barcelona. The first half was a bit messy for the Catalans. They were making clear mistakes at the back, especially when starting the place from behind. Gerard Martín, it wasn't his best performance today. Alejandro Balde, it wasn't his best performance today. And they were making those mistakes. They were allowing Villarreal to have clear chances. I have to put one name on the table again, which was Eric Garcia. He was correcting all his teammates. I've often been asked the question, where does Eric Garcia perform the best? And I still don't know how to answer that, because in my opinion, in an ideal situation for Hansi Flick and for Barcelona, Eric Garcia should always be a centre-back. The thing is that when you put him as a right-back, he delivers. He performs. When he's playing in midfield, he delivers. He performs. And I think Hansi Flick was saying, or was thinking, thank God Eric Garcia was on the pitch today in that first half, because he was just giving solutions to those mistakes made by Barcelona. It wasn't the best half for Barcelona. Villarreal had the most clear chances. Villarreal had, they were better than the Catalans on the ball. They created all the danger. They probably deserved much more at half time. But again, when you do those two mistakes against a top league, a top team, an elite team in a Liga, that penalty, absurd penalty, and that clear red card, you just, you can't compete. It's not the same doing those mistakes against another team. You're doing these mistakes against La Liga leaders. You were performing well, you were doing things right, you were unlucky, and suddenly two of your players made wrong decisions. Second half was easier for Barcelona as they were playing 11 against 10. They had more control of the ball. And despite that, even when they were 2-0 up after Lamine Yamal's goal, they left some spaces. And Villarreal had clear chances again. I've seen some saves by Joan García today. Maybe it's his best performance as a Barcelona player. I think it was 5 or 6 saves And we need to add to that those plays that were in the end disallowed because of offside positions, which Joan García had solved incredibly well. Impressive performance. Hello, Paul Davenport. Hello, Jack Harris. Hello, Sonia Mada. Villarreal disappoint me. I don't think I agree, to be honest. Villarreal disappointed me deeply this season in Europe. They were terrible in the Champions League. They're out of the competition. They've lost games against Pafos away, Copenhagen at home. They shouldn't have lost that. But in La Liga, they were doing incredibly well. Today, they were probably the better team on the pitch when they were 11 against 11. I think they were deserving more. They were just unlucky. Barcelona only could score thanks to a penalty, and then the second half was a different story once they were playing against a 10-man team. But I don't think it's fair to say that Villarreal disappointed me, but if it disappointed you, Sonia Mada, it's fair to say. It wasn't the best performance from Barcelona this season, but this is a very important win. I liked, as I mentioned, Eric Garcia. Once again, he was subbed off because he cannot play 90 minutes in every single game. In fact, when Jules Koundé picks up the muscular injury, and we'll see how serious is that, because the next game is the Catalan derby at the RCD Stadium against Espanyol, sorry. So we'll see how serious that injury is. So we all thought, okay, Eddie Garcia has to go and occupy that right back position. But no, he had been subbed off. So Marc Casado was again the right back for Hansi Flick. I also thought it was interesting the minutes for Marc Bernal. I think that Hansi Flick knows how important Marc Bernal can become again for Barcelona. Remember, he was crucial in Hansi Flick's first year until he picked up that serious injury last season at Vallecas against Rayo Vallecano. He sees something in him, obviously. He was ahead of Marc Casado last season. And there is an idea in Barcelona, which is the next 2-3 months will be crucial to understand what's the exact level of Marc Bernal, because maybe he could even start. I didn't like especially that midfield for Barcelona today in the first half. I think that Frenkie de Jong, Eric Garcia, Fermin, which, by the way, if I remember well, it was the same midfield that played against Chelsea at Stamford Bridge in the Champions League, and that didn't work at all. I don't think it worked really well today in terms of creating those plays, starting the plays from behind, searching for the associations that Barcelona needs. So we'll see who is the best partner for Pedri. Obviously, Pedri was missing today. That's a big miss for Barcelona, and despite that, they still grabbed all 3 points. Sonia Mara says it's across all competitions. Those Spanish teams are not great in general. In the situation where Pedri doesn't play, should we not play a midfield double pivot as opposed to playing Eric there? It was interesting, Stone, what we saw today, because it wasn't double pivot. You were right. It was Eric Garcia, and then Frenkie and Fermin playing in a more advanced position. I don't know if the solution would have been, Eric Frenkie as a double pivot, or Marc Bernal Eric, or Marc Bernal Frenkie. I don't know. Thing is that what we've seen in the best moments of Barcelona coached by Hansi Flick is not a double pivot. It's 3 midfielders in 3 different positions, which allow all those kind of movements. But obviously, when it works better is when Pedri is on the pitch. But I was mentioning Joan Garcia before. I was very impressed by his performance today. Those saves are miraculous. His capacity of starting the plays from behind with his feet is just impressive. And I understand why De La Fuente keeps trusting Unai Simon, because it's his goalkeeper. And I've been told always by professionals that whenever you manage a national team, what's important is the group, to keep the group united. And when something works, don't touch it. Things are working for Spain, that's obvious. But in my opinion, Joan Garcia is a much better goalkeeper than Unai Simon right now. I don't know if he's the best goalkeeper in La Liga, because what we saw yesterday from Thibaut Courtois de Santiago Bernabéu, that was impressive. Sevilla maybe should have won that game, but they didn't win that. They didn't win that, in part because of Thibaut Courtois was there. I was lucky enough to be at Montilivi today for that Girona Atlético de Madrid game. I just saw probably the save of the season from Jan Oblak to Axel Witsel. And then I see this performance from Joan García. Do we have the best 3 goalkeepers in the world in La Liga EA Sports? I think we do. Austin, hello. I believe the best midfield when Pedri is not available should be Olmo with Frenkie, then Fermin. I get your point. I think Dani Olmo, if we are talking about the midfielders from Barcelona at the top level, I think it's Frenkie, Pedri, Dani Olmo. I think it's that. I have my doubts with Frenkie de Jong, though, because sometimes there are some things I don't fully understand from his performances, despite in the second half, obviously, Hansi Flick told his players, give the ball to Frenkie de Jong. That's it, because we have one more player on the pitch, and he knows how to do that. But the speed he plays at, when they need to recover the ball and pressure, there's a huge difference between what Pedri does and what Frenkie de Jong does. And I've really enjoyed Eric Garcia there. And at the beginning of last season, I was very impressed from Mar Bernal. So we'll see how things work for the midfield of Barcelona. So just to end, very important win for Barcelona. It was frustrating for Villarreal and for Marcelino after how good they were doing things until the 40th minute when Renato Vega was sent off. And it was unfair for them to be losing at that point. But I think they will be there in La Liga this season. I think they will play the Champions League next season. They don't have any other competition now to focus on, only La Liga. That sometimes is an advantage. They were knocked out of the Champions League, knocked out of the Copa del Rey. So important for Villarreal. Crucial win for Barcelona, as Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid had won their games. And again, I think the man of the match for Barcelona would probably be between Joan García, Eric Garcia, Rafinha, and Lamine Yamal, despite not being his best performance, despite suffering that terrible tackle, he was still there delivering. He always gives a plus of magic, some options when nobody sees options. But I don't think it was his best performance despite that goal he scored. In the end, Barcelona won a very important game, one of the toughest games in La Liga EA Sports. They play at La Cerámica, and they are still at the top of the table with 4 more points than Real Madrid. But I'll say exactly the same I said after El Clásico. After El Clásico, everybody said, well, this season Real Madrid will win La Liga. They are playing better. Barcelona are a disaster. And it's 5 points. Well, there's 4 points now. But if Barcelona have 4 more points than Real Madrid, with Real Madrid always in a constant crisis for 2 months lately because they don't play well, we know that. Nobody knows what their style is, but they still win. And they're only 4 points behind Barcelona. So everything can change in only 1 week in La Liga. So it will be tight. And we'll be here to explain it to you. Ryan, you've joined just at the end of this post reaction, but I'm sure you'll be able to watch it whenever we post it. Thanks everyone for joining. It was a pleasure to be here, as always. Bye-bye.